Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. Today in the audience we have 4 visitors from France. Some of them have been to Pondicherry on their previous visits, but still they would like to know something basic about integral yoga and the school of yoga founded by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And therefore that's what we shall talk about today. Now, one of the most celebrated quotes of Sri Aurobindo is, "All life is yoga," which means all life can be yoga. But at the same time, even those who are familiar with this quote, when they are asked what yoga is, the first thing they think of is asanas and pranayamas. You're not doing asanas and pranayamas all your life. And how do you really put the two together? Now, these are some of the things which we shall try and touch today and understand how this school of yoga, that is integral yoga, really becomes integral. Integral means complete or total, which means that it does incorporate what we normally associate with yoga, that is asanas and pranayamas, but it is much more than that. Now, to understand that, let's start with the usual common idea of what yoga is. That is a set of physical practices like asanas and pranayamas, and at the most, meditation. Now, what do these techniques do? At the cost of oversimplification, one might say that asanas and pranayamas are primarily for keeping the body healthy, whereas meditation keeps us at peace. It improves the ability to concentrate, which means meditation is primarily to improve the function of the mind. So, the one set of techniques improves the function of the body, another set of techniques improves the function of the mind. But then what are body and mind? They are mere instruments, and improving the function of the instruments is necessary, but it is not sufficient. For example, if one has a knife, one can use that knife to chop fruits and vegetables, and one can also use the same knife to stab somebody. In the same way, if the function of the body and the mind has been improved by the yogic techniques like asanas, pranayamas, and meditation, now that the instruments are better, the person will be able to do whatever the person does better. Because in everything that we do in life, we use a combination of the body and the mind. And therefore, whether a person is working in an office, or is a doctor, or a manager, or a scientist, or one is staying at home and taking care of children, looking after the house, no matter what one is doing, one is using a combination of the body and the mind. And if the function of the body and the mind has been improved by using techniques like asanas, pranayamas, and meditation, the person will be able to do all these things better. But then I'll ask you a question. Suppose there is a terrorist who is physically unfit, mentally disturbed, and intellectually dull, not intelligent. Now, will this person be able to launch a successful terrorist attack? He won't be able to do it, isn't it? Now, suppose this person improves the function of the body and the mind by practicing the yogic techniques. When he does that, now he's physically more fit, he's mentally not disturbed, he has improved his ability to concentrate, and therefore now he has improved his chances of becoming a successful terrorist. Now, if a system helps a terrorist as much as it helps, say, a teacher who is working in a school or college. Hmm? A system which helps a terrorist as much as it helps a teacher cannot be called a spiritual discipline. And we all say that yoga is a spiritual discipline. Now, how do we reconcile the two? Yoga is a spiritual discipline because it not only has the techniques for improving the function of the body and the mind, it also has guidance on how to use the body and the mind. And if we use this guidance which is available in yoga, the person will not become a terrorist. So that is what makes it a spiritual discipline. So one can almost put it mathematically that yoga is equal to a set of techniques plus guidance on how to use the body and the mind. Now, how can we use the body and the mind in the best possible way? The best way to use the body and the mind will be that which takes into consideration, which makes good use of all parts of the being. Which means understanding the totality of the person is important for using the body and the mind properly. And the totality is not just the body and the mind. One might think that, well, I have a mind which can help me decide what is good and bad, and that part of the mind will tell me, do not become a terrorist, and therefore I will not become a terrorist. So I used my mind not to become a terrorist, and that's how I will do it. Now, it's not as simple as that. Because the person who becomes a terrorist also has a mind. And he does it thinking that he is doing for a good cause. He has used his mind. Which means that the mind can give reasons for becoming a terrorist, and he doesn't look upon himself as a terrorist. He thinks he's fighting for a cause. And it can give us reasons for not becoming a terrorist. So the mind doesn't help us. And which means that there is something else which may be available to us within ourselves, which can tell us how to use the body and the mind in the best possible way. And that is why it is important to think what the totality of the person is. The totality of the person is not just the body and the mind, it includes also the soul. I'm jumping quickly to the soul because all of us, by and large, accept as an article of faith that we do have a soul. Most people do accept that we have a soul. Not only they accept it as an article of faith, they also have some sort of a dim awareness that we are not just the body and the mind. There's something more to us. But what that something more is, we feel, well, it is just there, it happens to be there. It is the soul. It's an inert thing. And at least it gives us the consolation that it is the immortal part of us. And therefore, after we are dead and gone, at least something will survive. So that consolation is available. But the soul has a function more than that. Has a function more than that. The soul is also a guide. It is a guide better than the mind. And to understand that, let's take an example. Suppose these tourists who are here from France, they go to a shopping center, like say Chandni Chowk. It's quite likely that they will find there some little boy, maybe, approaching them. He is in a shabby dress. And, sir, ma'am, please, give me some money, Now, if the boy is a little more clever, then what he'll do is, they are suppose near a shop which is selling some garments. He'll say, dress, please get me a dress. See, my clothes are so torn, shabby, get me a dress. Now, they are forced to stop near that shop, and then they look at the shopping window, and then they find there are beautiful dresses there. And suppose one of them takes a fancy for a dress. Maybe I can also get this dress. Looks very beautiful. Now, suppose she enters the shop and gets that dress. It will be an emotional decision. But before she enters the shop. Suppose she thinks a little, she may feel that, well, I don't need this dress. What will I do with an Indian dress in France? I have enough clothes at home to last me a lifetime. I don't need this dress. I shouldn't be spending money unnecessarily on something which I will probably never use. But then this boy is also around, he's persisting. So now she's debating whether to buy the dress, whether to buy the dress for myself, whether to buy a dress for this child, whether to buy both. And all this debate is going on in her mind. And then she finally makes up her mind, I don't want anything. She builds up her consumer resistance and starts walking away from there, and maybe tries to satisfy this boy with a coin, a little money, and tries to go away from there. Now, what is going on in her mind is a lot of conflict. But suppose instead of that conflict, she puts her mind at peace, she may get a whisper from somewhere, I don't really need the dress, but this boy seems to need it. So why not get a dress for him? And she enters the shop and gets a dress for this boy. Now compare what will happen as a result of these two choices. She somehow manages to deal with the boy, also builds up her consumer resistance, does not buy the dress herself, and moves away. She feels guilty. Somewhere deep within, I heard that I should buy the dress for this boy, but I didn't. So she feels a little guilty. I had the money, I could have easily bought it. He seemed to really need it. She feels guilty. And maybe she'll think about it a few times more during the day, maybe the next day, which means that this uneasiness tends to become recurrent. On the other hand, suppose she decides not to buy the dress herself because she thinks she doesn't need it, at least she needs it much less than this boy does, and therefore she gets this boy a dress. What is the result? She feels happy and she has lasting peace. I did the best thing that I could do. Now, what has happened is that she heard that little whisper that came from within. Now, where did that whisper come from? It was a whisper that did not use the crutch of reasoning. I need this dress because of this reason. I don't need this dress because of this reason. This boy needs it for this reason. This boy needs it, doesn't need it for that reason. No. So it didn't go into that sort of analysis. It just said, the best thing to do is to get a dress for this boy, without going into any reasoning. And that choice came in a split second, did not take any time. It was very clear, although it was not very loud, and did not require any further thinking, although it could be ignored by the mind, but it did not call for a debate. It just told what the right thing to do is. Now, where did this voice come from? This is the voice that came from the soul. So it means that soul is not an inert entity. It speaks to us. It speaks to us at the right moment, gives us the best choice. And this makes us even more confident in a rational way that we are not just the body and the mind. Because this voice did not have the characteristics of what comes from the mind. You see, the mind has two aspects, feeling and thinking. Feelings guide us towards what feels good right here and now, which could be something very flimsy, like, say, buying a dress which I don't need. The intellect is very versatile. It can argue for doing something. It can also argue for not doing something. But here is a third set of voice, which comes from somewhere else, tells very quickly and clearly what the right thing to do is, and doesn't go into any arguments. Now, this is the voice which is coming from the soul, and when we allow this voice to illumine our minds, then we find that we can anticipate a joy coming from this action which this soul is telling us. And we can also find a few reasons for why it should be done. The boy's needs are greater than mine, which means this voice is working on the principle of oneness. For that moment, I'm not thinking in terms of what I get and what this boy gets. We are just looking at who needs this object more, which means that the I and the other person part, that has been dissolved. The separation between me and this boy has been dissolved. We are behaving as one unit and just looking which of these two units needs something more than the other. And we are fulfilling that. We are acting in that light. Now, this is what we call a sense of oneness, which comes from the level of the soul, because at that level we are actually truly one. To it in the simplest language, we are all one because we are all children of the same God. And that's why we are all one. So the soul speaks from that point of view, from that vantage point, from that height, from that higher plane, at which the individual differences, the separation between us as distinct individuals, that dissolves. In other words, what I have tried to do in a roundabout way is to talk about what the totality of the person is. The totality of the person is not just the body and the mind having both these aspects, feeling and thinking. The totality also includes the soul. And the soul has a dynamic aspect. It's not a static entity. The soul has a dynamic aspect which tells us what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. So the soul is also a guide which is infallible. And it's a guide which can influence our body and which can influence our mind, which can illumine our mind, which can help our mind to function better. And once the mind has started speaking the same language as the soul, the body, being a docile instrument, just does what the mind tells it to do. Which means that the voice of the soul can be filtered by the mind, and for that moment, the mind is speaking the same language as the soul. That is what is happening in that brief moment when you decide to buy a dress for this boy. The soul is spoken, your mind has now agreed, and the body is working to step into the shop, get the dress. So the body is working. So the body and the mind have come together, they are working as one unit. So this is one way in which you can say integral yoga is integral, because it is total or complete in the sense that it is taking into account the totality of the person. And now yoga can become all life, because it doesn't apply only to this instance of shopping. We are getting opportunities to make little choices throughout the day, every day, and some big choices occasionally in life, major choices, like say a career choice. So we are getting some major choices throughout life, and minor choices every day. And in those choices, if we look at it carefully, many of those choices are not entirely neutral. Some choices are not as good as the others, and we find that the best choice comes from the soul. It's a faint voice, it's a whisper, but all the same, if we are conscious of it, if we are aware of it, we will listen to it. We may not act upon it, we may ignore it, because it's a voice that does not insist. But at the same time, the voice is very much there. So this is one way in which integral yoga is integral. It takes into account the total person. In what other ways is it integral? It's integral because while it is emphasizing how we can bring yoga into daily life, and in that, one of the most important things is the choices that we make, it does not neglect the body because the body is a basic instrument. No matter what type of a life we want to live, even if we want to live a type of life in which we are making choices based on the voice of the soul, still we need a healthy body. So the body is not neglected, and therefore techniques such as asanas and pranayamas are also a part of integral yoga because they keep us healthy. But then now I'm not doing them just because it will make me healthy. I'm doing it because I need this health so that my body will be able to function as a good and fit instrument for doing what I should be doing. What I should be doing is what the soul tells me to do, but to do that, I still need a healthy body. And therefore, I am practicing these asanas and pranayamas, it will keep my body healthy. So, it's not just for keeping disease away, just for postponing death, it has a higher purpose. So, a healthy body becomes not the end in itself, but it becomes a means to a higher end. So the body is not neglected. Now, where does this come from? Where do these techniques come from? These techniques come from Hatha Yoga. The classic school which gives us the techniques in great detail is Hatha Yoga. So we take some cues from Hatha Yoga, the basic principle of Hatha Yoga, some basic techniques of Hatha Yoga. We do incorporate also in integral yoga so that the body is not neglected. But then the body alone is not enough. We also need a mind that functions properly. And therefore, we also do not neglect the mind. And if a technique like meditation helps us in keeping the mind more at peace, it helps us in developing the ability to concentrate, etc., we can use meditation also. So meditation can also be incorporated in integral yoga. And where do we get the cues for that from? From Raja Yoga or Patanjali's yoga, the Ashtanga Yoga. That's where we get the cues for the technique of meditation. But then, is there a set way in which everybody has to practice this yoga? No, because suppose somebody is unable to meditate. He need not meditate. The work itself can become the meditation for this person. Suppose a person can do some asanas but not the others. Suppose a person is paralyzed and cannot do any asanas at all. Does this person get disqualified from the practice of yoga? No, this person does not, because this person also has choices to make and where he can listen to the voice of the soul, which means that while the techniques are acceptable and also desirable, no techniques are specifically prescribed and no techniques are specifically proscribed either. Which means there is no technique which must be done for the practice of integral yoga, and at the same time, any technique can be used, and we have a rationale why we use it, because we do not want to neglect the body and the mind. But at the same time, this flexibility exists. Everybody doesn't have to do exactly the same thing. And more than that, if we are bringing it into daily life, everybody's life is different. And therefore, the way the person is able to translate it while practicing yoga into daily life will be different, because everybody's life is different. We get different sets of choices, different type of choices, and therefore that flexibility is available. And also we are also different by temperament. Some may like to practice yoga by, say, with the help of knowledge which comes from a talk like this or by reading a book, and then they want to practice it. Some may feel that, well, basically doing the work itself in a disinterested manner, that without keeping my personal interest in mind, that itself is enough. I don't have to know much knowledge is not necessary. So long as I'm doing my job honestly and sincerely with dedication and without keeping my personal interest in mind, that is enough. That is my way of practicing yoga in daily life. And there may be a third person who may say, well, I am basically living a life which is a good life, an ethically sound life, primarily for the sake of God, because I know God exists and He's always watching what I am doing, and therefore I'm just a devotee of God. Now, that is also acceptable. Now, this type of freedom, whether to emphasize knowledge or action or devotion, where do we have that available? In the Gita. So, we are taking cues also from the yoga of the Gita. Which means that in integral yoga, what Sri Aurobindo and the mother have done is to pick up the basic principles of all the major traditional schools of yoga, and created out of these basic principles a system which is not just a mere combination but a single harmonious entity. It's not that they've just been combined together. I'll do asanas for 1 hour every day, so I practice Hatha Yoga. I'll meditate for half an hour, that is Raja Yoga. I'll read a book, and therefore that is every day, and therefore there's Jnana Yoga, and I will listen to some devotional music, so that is Bhakti Yoga. So I have practiced many schools of yoga, that is integral yoga. It's not that. We are weaving a harmonious entity out of the whole thing, and that is what integral yoga. So one way of looking at yoga, why this yoga is integral, is takes into account the entire person, the body, mind, and the soul. Second way in which we can say that it is integral is that it takes into consideration all the major traditional schools of yoga. So that makes it again integral or total. The third way in which it is integral is that nobody is disqualified, it is meant for everybody. So that can be also a way of looking at it, that yes, it is integral because it suits everybody. Inability to meditate does not disqualify the person. Inability to perform certain asanas does not disqualify the person, and therefore it is meant for everybody. So that also makes it integral. And it is also for everybody in the sense that we don't have to be a certain type of person. We can start from where we are and move from there, become a better person. As one of the visitors told me just half an hour ago, that is this place about becoming a better person, or is it a religious place? As it's for becoming a better person. So the place is for becoming a better person. This yoga is for becoming a better person. But then what we learn in some depth is how we can become a better person. How we can become a better person is making the best use of what we have within us. And what is the best within us? The best within us is the soul. Because the soul is the spark of the divine within us. And that soul also has associated with it the spokesperson of the divine. Someone who speaks the voice of the divine. That is also a part of the soul that is planted in us. So we make best use of what is the best within us, which is a representative of the best in the universe. We make use of that to tell us how we can become a better person. So we get the guidance from there. So essentially it's about becoming a better person, but we are taking it to its logical conclusions, not depending upon a set ethical code which has been prescribed for everybody in a religious scripture. We are not using that. What we are using is the guide which is available within each one of us. The universal guide which has a representative within all of us. That universal guide, that universal entity which knows everything and therefore does not need a set of rules in a book. And it's also an entity that can do everything, and therefore it is all powerful, and therefore when we decide to listen to this voice, we also acquire the courage to act on that voice because of its all powerful character. So that essentially is what integral yoga is, and we have talked about one way in which it can be brought into daily life, and that is by making the right choices. Is there any other way in which we can make it a part of our daily life? There are two other ways, at least, in which we can do it. One is by doing whatever work we do in a different spirit, with a different attitude. The work remaining the same, which is important because sometimes also thought if we have to really practice yoga as a spiritual discipline, then we can't live in the real world. We have to retire to a forest or a cave. Huh? But we can continue doing whatever work we do and still practice integral yoga by doing that work in a different way, with a different attitude, with a different motive. So it's the sincerity of the motive that becomes most important. Now, what is it that makes this work a part of yoga? What makes it a part of yoga is treating ourselves not as the doers, but as instruments of the divine, as mere instruments. Now, just to give you an example, suppose there is a spoon, and the spoon thinks that the spoon feeds me. Because I can pick up the food in the spoon and take it to my mouth, the spoon starts thinking, I feed this person. But then what happens is that the spoon decides to get naughty. So as I bring it near the mouth, it starts shaking. So instead of the food entering my mouth, it falls on my clothes, it spoils my shirt, and the food doesn't go in. So now the spoon is even more convinced, see, when I want to feed him, I can feed him. When I don't want to feed, I can also not feed him. So the spoon is convinced. But then one day what happens is that as I'm taking the spoon towards the mouth, somebody bumps into my chair. The chair shakes, and again the food drops, and I can't eat it. Now the spoon didn't play the mischief. Now the spoon starts thinking, why did this happen? Huh? So why did this person have to come now and bump into the chair? Now, why does all this happen? All this happens because the spoon starts thinking that I'm the one who feeds, I'm the one who can decide when not to feed. But then sometimes it realizes that something happens which the spoon doesn't have anything to do with, and yet I cannot eat. So this creates some doubts. Am I actually the one that feeds this person? And then when it thinks a little more deeply, it realizes that I am only a spoon. I am an instrument in the hands of this person who is picking up the food and taking it there. So then, it realizes that this person, I can feed only when this person picks me up. And if I get naughty, yes, I become a bad instrument. Then I don't do what this person is whose hands I am wants me to do. But then there can be many other things which can also happen, which can make the outcome different from what I wanted. I wanted to feed this person, and yet this person doesn't eat. So the outcome becomes just the opposite of what I wanted. But then once it realizes that I'm only an instrument, I'm only a spoon, I don't feed, then it is not worried by this failure. It doesn't take credit for the success of feeding me. It doesn't get upset when it fails to feed me. Why? Because now it has realized it's only an instrument. So we are also like that. We are instruments in the hands of God. If we decide to become good instruments, faithful instruments, by having a contact within us, God has that representative within us which can tell us what God wants us to do as an instrument. So whatever work I am doing, if I take it as work which has been given to me, like the feeding of the food is work that has been given to the spoon by the person who is eating. So God has given me this work as a teacher or as a parent or as a manager or a scientist. So God has given me this work. I decide to do it as His instrument. Then I realize I am not the doer. I am only an instrument in the hands of God. And I feel privileged because God has no shortage of instruments. Just as the person who eats, he has no shortage of spoons. He can use another one. So the one fact that he has picked up this one is a privilege. So it's my privilege that I have been chosen. So since it's my privilege, I'll do it in the best possible way and I'll not be naughty. Now, not being naughty means what? I'll listen to that inner voice. Huh? I'll not do just the opposite, huh? Just different. But even if I listen to that inner voice, I become a good and faithful instrument. I am not naughty, yet I can't be very sure that the outcome will be what I expect from my work. The outcome will be quite different for some mysterious reason, like say somebody coming and bumping into the chair. Huh? So the outcome, which means I'm not attached to the outcome. I'm not upset by that failure. So that is the type of attitude, and you can see that with that attitude, not only you'll do the work in the best possible way because you're considering yourself a privileged instrument, a lucky instrument, but the so the work will be done in the best possible way, but then the person will not be affected by the outcome. The person will not take credit for the outcome. The person will not expect reward and recognition for a good outcome. And at the same time, the person will not be upset by an apparent failure. So long as the instrument has not been naughty, it's quite satisfied. I did what I was expected to. I did what came from my inner voice. But still, if the outcome is different, I can't help it. So I'm not upset. I'm only an instrument. So I'm trying to simplify sort of the attitude with which I work. So one thing, making choices. The second is the attitude with which I work. Third way. Even if I live like that, there's no guarantee that nothing will go wrong with my life. Still, I could have an incurable illness. I could have suffered from heavy financial loss. There may be some litigation against me. My partner may not behave the way I want him or her to behave. My child may not get into the type of career that I wanted the child to get into. So many things could happen. It doesn't make me immune from all these ups and downs of life. There could be a road accident in which I lose a limb. Now, any of these things can happen. Even if I am making the right choices in life, and even if I am working as an instrument, still these things could happen. Now, what yoga as a spiritual discipline tells us is that these are all opportunities for growth, for spiritual growth. Now, what does that mean? What it simply means is that it is a way in which it will become more and more natural for me, more and more habitual on my part to listen to my soul, to let my mind get illumined by the soul. So I'm moving in that direction. This movement is accelerated by everything that happens in life, by things which we look upon as fortune and things which we look upon as misfortune. Fortune also helps, misfortune also helps. So fortune helps by if I accept that with gratitude. Fortune means I have more than my share of something. And if I have more than my share of something, I share it with someone who needs it more than I do. Misfortune also is an opportunity. Misfortune becomes an opportunity if I understand that no matter how clever I am, how intelligent I am, how hardworking I am, still things don't happen my way all the time. And I find myself helpless, and whatever resources I am proud of, they also become completely useless in that situation. So when that happens, then I turn to a power which is higher, for whom nothing is difficult, everything is easy, and everything is possible. Which means that I move closer to the divine, I move closer to that highest, and I move closer to the highest also within me. Which is, I become closer to that highest which is within me, which is outside me, which is there in everybody else. Which means that I develop actually a greater sense of oneness with others as a result of this, because others also I find are quite often helpful to me in those situations. they are sent to me as an instrument of the divine. So, by seeing them as instruments of the divine who came to my help, I can start seeing the divine in them, particularly when I'm going through a difficult phase. So, that difficult phase of life becomes an opportunity for seeing that oneness with others. And that makes me, in turn, a different type of person, a person who is more loving, more caring, more willing to share, more compassionate. And these are all outer expressions of that sense of oneness, which in turn is based on a spiritual view of life, and that's why we call it spiritual growth. Now, that is also a part of yoga. So, basically, three things: making the right choices, listening to that inner voice. Secondly, doing our work in the spirit of yoga. As the Gita says, Yogastha Kuru Karmani. Perform all your actions from a yogic poise. And taking ups and downs of life, so called fortune and misfortune, as opportunities which have been sent to me for spiritual growth. So that gives me a dispassionate view of these events. I don't look upon them as fortune and misfortune. I don't look upon them as pleasant and unpleasant. I start looking upon them as events, conditions, circumstances which have been given to me so that I can live a meaningful life, a purposeful life, a life in which my purpose becomes spiritual growth. So that these are opportunities. So success is an opportunity, failure is an opportunity. They are opportunities and also trials. Trials because they are opportunities. To use the opportunity or not still is up to me. And if I use the opportunity, I pass the test. If I don't use the opportunity, I waste it, I failed. Because that can happen. Because success, instead of making me grateful and more willing to share, success can make me arrogant. In the same way, failure or misfortune, instead of taking me closer to God, misfortune can make me bitter and cynical. That can also happen. So that is a wasting an opportunity. So in that sense, success and failure, fortune and misfortune are trials, are tests. And they are also opportunities. If we pass the test, make good use of the opportunity, then we are practicing yoga. So you can see that integral yoga truly makes use of all life. And that is also a way of looking at it, why it is called integral. Because it's making use of all aspects of life. If you look at the work that we do, the choices that we make, and the fortune and misfortune which may still visit us, what else is left in life? और बाकी बचा ही क्या है? इसी की तो सारी जिंदगी बनी है. That's what all our life consists of. What else is there in life? So all life is yoga. That is what makes all life yoga. And that would be another way of looking at why it is called integral. It is total because it takes into account the totality of life. So it takes into account the totality of life, it takes into account the totality of the person, it takes into account the totality of the major traditional schools of yoga, and it takes into account totality of humanity. Everybody is eligible. So that is why it is called integral. Integral in so many ways. Does it go beyond traditional yogas? That is the next point. Yes, does it take into account all traditional schools, but does it go beyond them in any way? Yes, that also it does. And the way it goes beyond is that while traditional yogas are primarily for the individual, in integral yoga, the focus is on the collective. That is, if a large number of people start practicing yoga, which means they start walking the spiritual path, the quality of human life will go up. We look upon it from the evolutionary perspective. Human beings will evolve. They evolve in consciousness. And this evolution will eventually lead to a better world. So it is that collective aspect also Of course, the individual is the unit of the collective. But then, if the number of units increases, which can happen if we make a beginning with ourselves, we can start with ourselves, but then we can also inspire others. To some extent, it will happen automatically. The more the number of people who engage, the more will be the number whom they'll inspire. Because both positivity and negativity can be contagious. So anybody who's doing something positive, even through that contagion, that nearness, that influence which spreads, is helping that process. Now, will it happen in larger numbers now than it has been happening in the past? Because some people have been very nice people even in the past. Sri Aurobindo and the mother have visualized that yes, it will happen. More and more people will start doing it now. Because the evolution of consciousness has been going on for a long time, and now it has reached a critical stage when a much larger number of people will turn to this type of path, and therefore this process will accelerate. It will pick up in speed. And therefore, we can expect a better world in not too distant a future. The near future could be a few hundred years away, but when this vision is totally realized. But firstly, a few hundred years is nothing compared to the human history, which goes back to a few million years, if not more. So, compared to that, a few hundred years is nothing. Secondly, while the process may not be still complete, the process has begun. People have started perceiving more and more that while there is a lot of negativity around, the amount of positive work is also increasing. More and more young people are now looking at life not only in terms of physical comforts and so on, they are looking at life in terms of life having a meaning, life having a purpose, and they are happy to sacrifice something in terms of their material goals for the sake of another goal which gives meaning and purpose to their life. And this goal which they have accepted now is a much higher and wider goal, which looks beyond their own individual self, which takes into account some concern, some issue which actually is not their personal issue. It is bothering somebody else, but they make it their own issue. Depending upon the passion, somebody is trying to work on the environment, somebody is taking up children's welfare, somebody is taking women's welfare, somebody is taking poverty, somebody may take up something else. So, depending upon the passion, somebody may feel that education should be improved. So, the passions can be different. So, the expression can be different because we are all made differently. But to give an expression to something which is built within me, which I feel passionate about, in such a way that it doesn't just help me, it helps more and more people, is itself a very positive sign, and that is happening on a much larger scale today than probably it has ever happened before. So these are some of the signs that yes, the world is changing, and the vision of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, or their yoga, of the world becoming a better place in the near future will materialize. We may all think that it should happen during our lifetime, but that is not important. The important thing is we can contribute to the process, which may or may not happen to us in this life, but same time it will happen, and while contributing to it, we can also enjoy the process, because the process itself is enjoyable. That is what yoga is about. The process is enjoyable, the journey is enjoyable. We can forget about the destination. That's another one of the dictums in yoga. We get obsessed with the goal will not come any nearer, it will actually outdistance us. So we forget about the goal, focus on the journey, enjoy the journey. That we can still do. And it is because we are doing it not only for ourselves, that we are doing for the collective, that makes it even more enjoyable. And that's why the mother has said that we are passing through very exciting times, a special period in history when major changes are taking place and a new type of future is being created, and we can participate in it. And therefore, we are sort of participating in an adventure, in an unprecedented event in the history of this planet. Therefore, passing through those exciting times, so that itself is a privilege. So with that, I think I'll stop here for any questions that you might have. Any questions? there are no questions, then we go some more devotional music. Take, you can sit here. Yes. Yes, that's a good question. Can we practice yoga without bringing in the spiritual element? Because spirit, is the all pervasive uh, presence of the creator or the divine, which means that if you do not believe in God, then naturally there's no spirit and there's no spiritual element. So, can you practice yoga still? Yes, you can, because then it becomes a process of self improvement, a process of self improvement in which we are trying to go towards self perfection. Because perfection, if you believe in God, only God is perfect, human beings are imperfect. But if you do not believe in God, then you say that you are just going towards self perfection. Essentially comes to the same thing, but you are not bringing God in and you are keeping the spirit out. So one can do that. But then that becomes a more difficult journey. It becomes more difficult because uh, when we are on this path, we realize that no matter how much we try, we do not make much progress without some mysterious element entering, which we call divine grace. That is a special uh, favor which the divine does to us because we are on this path. So the outcome seems much more rewarding than our efforts. So naturally, if one does not believe in God, one will not believe in divine grace. I'm not saying that God is partial, that if you do not believe in me, I'll not shower grace on you. God's grace is available to all of us, even if we do not believe in God. But then we become unreceptive to it. We refuse to receive it. So if we refuse to receive it, naturally it can't work in us. For that grace to work within us, we need to believe. So we are denied that. Secondly, what happens is that this person finds it more difficult to accept the ups and downs of life, especially the downs. The person says that, well, I'm living such a good life, moving towards self perfection, then why is it happening to me that uh, I had this road accident or I had this incurable illness? Which means that we find it difficult to accept. You find it easier to accept only if you believe in a higher power which is always loving us, which is kind to us, and therefore even this probably has something hidden in it which is good for us. Now, that you can accept only if you believe in that higher power. So, it sort of leaves us entirely to our own devices when you dispense with divine grace and you dispense with surrender to the divine. These are the two things you naturally get rid of. They are out of yoga. So, when you subtract from yoga, when you take away from yoga these two elements, the element of divine grace and the element of surrender to the divine, then naturally we are left on our own. And we are using only our own devices, which will make it we sort of introduce an element of uncertainty, insecurity, and anxiety. So you cannot have the same type of mental peace while being on this path of going towards self perfection uh, without believing in God. So that's where it is. But one can certainly work on it, and many people have tried it. And atheists also try to work towards self perfection. The rationalistic humanism is essentially a product of that type of thinking. And a person who's a rationalist and a humanist can do a lot of good to the world. So when it comes to the world, he can do a lot of good. But he himself remains always vulnerable and still subject to a lot of mental disturbances. He cannot have the same type of mental peace which you can have if you believe in divine grace, which means you are not anxious for the progress. Progress will be taken care of by divine grace. And you are not worried about the so-called misfortunes because you accept them also as something which has come as a result of that divine grace. Any other questions?